Welcome to the Atomic Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Osborn. And on this podcast, we interview successful businesses for them to share their experiences in their business, with the lessons they've learned, and share them with us so we can all learn together. As always, the show is sponsored by the LinkedIn Reverse Podcast Method, the new way that established businesses are creating a reliable acquisition channel of conversations with their ideal prospects. We use this method to book 26 qualified leads and sales calls in 10 days without any ad spend, outreach, in the social media posting, or any of those old, ineffective, traditional marketing methods that everybody hates. But to find out more, direct message me on LinkedIn to have a chat. The link to that will be in the show notes below. But on today's show, we have Paul Finnegan. He's the owner of Trout Hebrides, where they provide salmon, smolts, and also newly added in where they do some trout smoking as well. So, Paul, thanks so much for being on the show today. And I want to start off by asking you a question that I always love to start with, which is this. If you were somehow able to go back in time to when you started your very first business, but knowing what you know now, what would you do differently in the first 12 months?
The first 12 months, I would look to take people on. So one of these, when I first started, I was very much one of these owner operated businesses. So I could do everything myself. We're a fish farming business primarily. So I could do the electrics, I could do the fish growing, I could do the accounts, I could do everything, and you thought, well, why should I pay an accountant to do my VAT or to do my wages when I can do it myself? And that was a massive mistake I made. And I actually ran the business that way for quite a few years. And what that led to was basically burning myself out, absolutely, completely burning myself out, exhaustion, basically. And that was that was the real lesson that I learned, that teamwork is really important. And people think, so for example, to do the wages for the guys now, it's 50 quid a month. It's like, you think back and you think it's 50 quid a month, for crying out loud. It's like, what are you doing? What were you doing? And at the beginning, people are cash strapped. And when you start the business, you obviously will have to do quite a bit of it yourself. But as soon as you're in a position to take people on, to say, put the accounts out to somebody, put the bookkeeping out to someone, you should do it, and because that's what I should have done. And that's the really biggest learning that I really took from the first year. And even going forward, it took me a long time to kind of get my head around it and understand really that when you're working in the business, you can't be working on the business. And all the mentors talk about it all the time. You see, and you think, oh yeah, right, it's all right for you to say that. But in reality, it's actually true, that you can't focus on anything else. I've now got 4 or 5 guys with me on the fish farming side, and I wouldn't have been able to look at doing the smoking side of it if I'd continued working on my own. I just never would have had the time. So that's a classic example of, and I know there's a lot of you, I think a lot of your people that are watching this make that mistake. They think that they should just be doing it all themselves, and they think to take a first person on, it's really expensive. But, you don't necessarily have to take them on full time. You could take them on 1 day a week, or you could do VAing if you're doing sales. There's ways around that, and there's ways of looking at that, in terms of saying, well, if you don't want to, say you're an electrician, for example, and you want to do you want to do carry on doing the electrician work, but you still need to do sales because sales are so important. You can actually get somebody to do your sales, or you can take a Sparky on for a day a week, and you do the sales. It doesn't really matter. But the fact of the matter is, then you're starting to split the workload, and you're actually making yourself much more effective and making the business much more effective as well.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. You're talking about, you don't necessarily have to bring someone on full time, but
No.
what can you do to just start alleviating some of the day-to-day things that need to get done? Or even, like you said, once a day, bring someone on just to help free up your time. And I think that's really important because that it shows you, it gives you the confidence that's like, okay, actually, I can bring someone on. Wow, oh my gosh, this is actually amazing. And then you're like, how do I give more time over to them, which is good. So yeah, totally. It's a great way to look at it for sure. So, as you've grown the business, what are some of the bigger challenges that you faced growing the business?
So for me, in my sector, in the fish farming, I'm very much I'm the smallest operator, one of the smallest operators in Scotland. in the UK, basically in terms of salmon. And one of the big problems we've had is there's been massive consolidation within our sector. And so you've now got 3 or 4 or 5 big multinational companies, and you're basically working with these guys all the time. And so it's very, your market in that respect is very, very limited. And so you can never, it's very difficult to expand. And we also have a lot of environmental conditions in terms of what we're allowed to stock on our license, how much we're allowed to stock. And so there's a big restriction on that. And so that's going on with, that's the reason we've looked to change the business, and well, not change the business, but diversify the business to looking to do smoking products. Because one of the problems we've got is that we're the middle user. So the multinational company will give us the eggs, we'll grow them to this particular stage, which is about 100 grams. Then we take them from the fresh water, and it's the same stage as if salmon's running down the river, it spawns in the rivers, the eggs are hatched, then the fish makes its way down the river to the sea. So that stage, when it arrives in the sea, is the stage that we transfer them. So we're very much the middleman in that, and that has its own restrictions, and you're always a bit on. Not everything's always in your control, and so for us, we want to get much more control in the business, and so that's why we sort of diversified into starting to do the end product. So the value added and the end product is more. And it goes back to what I said before about in terms of working on the business, not working in the business. Because I've got guys with me, I can leave them to go off and do stuff for the day. And then that allows me to focus and come back and say, sit here in the house and or in the office and say, right, I've got to start working on Trout Hebrides. I've got to start working on how I can set the smoking side of it up. What do we need? Costs, how are we going to market? And that frees that time up. And that's been for us the main challenge. We're minnows in an industry where they're basically Goliaths. All these big 4 or 5 multinational companies are publicly exchanged. They're on the public exchanges now, mostly in Oslo because they're mostly Norwegian companies. But that's what we're kind of competing against, not even competing against, but working with,
Yeah, really interesting. Where do you envisage everything going with the trout smoking side of the business that you've started up?
I think that what's going to happen in quite a short space of time, I would say within the next 5 years, is that we'll almost come out of the growing side and we'll move almost exclusively into the smoking side. Because one of the big problems, as I said before, that you deal with multinationals. So their aim is to horizontally and vertically integrate. So they want to do everything, every aspect, and they're already doing this. And one of the restrictions I've had up until now is the amount of sites they can get and the water in the freshwater and the amount of fish they can produce and the amount of water they've got. And so what they've started building now is big recirculation systems, massive recirculation systems. I mean, last year we did 500,000 fish. They're doing 6 million fish in a research facility that's recirculating the water. 98% is recirced. And so the company I grew for last year, they've just put the spade in the ground on their 3rd one. Now that's effectively going to wipe everybody out. All small operators are going to be finished. That's what I predict anyway. And so for us, it's really important that we've got to diversify now before we get blown out of the water. And so this becomes really, really important for us, the smoking and developing that whole side of the business. And so, that's really for us now is really the focus,
Yeah. I know what I'm trying to get to. I don't know if this would be the right question for it, but what were you already mentioned some of it. What were some of the fundamental shifts of diversifying what you're doing? I know you said that you come from a family of doing this, and so it might have just been done the same way for a long period of time. And it's like, oh, are we going into something new? I'm sure there's probably risks involved. Maybe a little bit of what if it doesn't work, or but also the upside of wow, if it does work, why didn't we do this a long time ago? So there's all of those different balances of stuff. What have you what's the process you've gone through and try to work that out and see what's the best next step? Because I'm assuming the trout smoking wasn't the only thing that you were looking at to diversify. Maybe it was, but what made you get to where you are now with that process?
So basically, for us, what was really important initially was to stop being the middleman and become the end user. And so for us, we obviously salmon is smoked by everybody. So initially, we looked at it and said, right, every Tom, Dick, and Harry and his dog is doing smoking salmon. So he said, right, we've got to try and do something a bit different. And that's how we ended up coming to trout. Now, when we initially looked at trout, what we actually thought about doing was actually diversifying and growing the trout ourselves. We have been doing that in the past, and we're starting to move away from that now and just go right through and do the whole process right through ourselves. But due to different things, we've decided not to do that. We've decided to buy the fish in. And that's primarily come from the size of fish that we can produce in the freshwater compared to the size of fish you can produce in the sea, because these are sea-run fish, sea-run trout that we use. And the yield is much, much, much bigger and much better. And so that for us on an economic scale was really important. And so we did the figures initially and thought trout's not going to work. It's just not enough margin in it, because trout are generally cheaper to buy than salmon, and there's just not the margin. But once we started looking and seeing looking at the prices in the supermarkets initially and thinking, flipping heck, hang on, they're charging this much. Now I know that obviously supermarkets, and that's not really my target market, but you then began to realize, let's look at these figures again. And so I went back and looked at them and then began to realize actually there is money to be made in this. And so for us, that was really the aim. It was have more control, have much more control in what we were doing, without having to rely on outside factors all the time. And for us, I kind of follow different people and mentor. And so we're now looking at focusing on how we can. You see so many people selling, like John Ross, so many people selling smoked salmon, and they're selling it in such a particular way. And we're now looking at how, when we market and we start doing the sales in a big scale, how we can be completely different from that, in looking at marketing from different other sectors in terms of saying, right, how can we make this different so that we're not the same as all the other smoked fish companies, And so that's really what we're focusing on at the moment, And I'm sort of a big follower. I kind of like a lot of what Alex Hermosi teaches, and I follow him quite a lot. I think he's really nuanced in the way that he looks at sales, and I can see a lot of, probably do quite a bit of what he's been proposing. But we're just starting to do it now, and we'll see if it starts to produce results. And I think it will. I think it really will.
Yeah. It's really interesting, that journey, because there's so much. I think that every business goes through a lot of stuff, and so it's just really interesting to hear your thought process and journey around how to diversify and what to diversify into. And it's so fascinating. What are your goals? Like, what would you like to achieve? I know you said in the next kind of 5 years, but what would your outcome be? What would you like to see happen?
We would obviously like to grow the business. One of the other things we've started doing is we look at buying and sell businesses as well, and that's something else I've sort of been looking into recently. And we recently tried to acquire another smokehouse, which actually in the end fell through, which was a shame. And that was quite a nice little operation. And so really, what we're looking to do now is use a lot of M&A tactics to actually help grow the business really fast, and try and because we're sitting quite far behind it. Obviously, we're just getting this going, and I'm not getting any younger, and we're just thinking, right, how can we catapult this really, really fast? And so for me now, the next stage is, I was initially using wholesalers, and obviously they keep the price really, really low. And I became very aware then that if we want to really, we have to have control of that wholesale side of it. And so one of the things we've been looking at as well is trying to buy a wholesale company, so we have control of the transport. And because of where we live on as I said, we live in the Outer Hebrides. One of the problems that companies have here is getting their product onto the mainland at a reasonable price, and actually being able to market that product on shop in premises and in hotels and restaurants on the mainland. And so that was one of the things that we thought, well, this can help offset the costs by actually doing other people's products as well as our own. And so that's kind of a target area we've got at the moment. But we're sort of very much in the case of trying to grow the business, not only just by organically, but by scaling in terms of buying other companies if we can get them, you know.
Amazing.
And it was a pity because it was a really nice little smokehouse, and the guy had been going about 40 years, and he was looking to retire. But it's funny because we thought, right, we've got this, and then he kind of kept changing the goalposts. And I think actually for a lot of business owners at that sort of, as you're getting older, they were sort of thinking, this is getting really real now. Before it was just like kind of discussions, and now this guy's getting really serious, and it's like, this is getting really real. And will that be enough money for me to live on when I leave and when I give up everything? And you could just see almost he kept changing the goalposts all the time. And even the broker was getting frustrated. You know, he was just saying, look, trying to persuade the guy to go with our offer, you know. And in the end, he just got cold feet and come out. So, but we're still looking. We're looking at other smokehouses as well, you know.
Yeah.
And so it's a kind of two-pronged attack. It's not only obviously how we're going to grow organically, but it's how we can also grow it by acquisition as well.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. Well, Paul, for everyone that is listening that might either be interested in your products, or maybe they have a smokehouse or they're wholesale and they're like, you know what, I'd be happy for Paul to acquire us. What's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
They can contact me through my sort of email address, or which is paul.finnegan2@btinternet.com, or even on the website, the Trout Hebrides website. There's a contact page, so they could maybe contact us there. So they're probably the best ways of contacting us, you know. So
amazing. Well, definitely recommend everyone reaching out to Paul if you feel he can help you out in any way. And so, Paul, thanks so much for being on the show today.
No,
it's very, very fascinating hearing your journey and everything that's been happening. So thank you for sharing that. And as a reminder to everyone listening, the show is sponsored by the LinkedIn Reverse Podcast Method, the new way that established businesses are creating a reliable acquisition channel of conversations with their ideal prospects that doesn't rely on any of the old, ineffective traditional marketing methods that everybody hates. To find out more, try message me on LinkedIn to have a chat. That's Jason A. Osborn. The link to that will be in the show notes below. And until next episode, stay inspired.